Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's three-day visit to India. The president arrived today to the Indian capital, New Delhi. We're going to be focusing on his attendance, which coincides with the 74th International Republic Day of India. We're going to be focusing on this visit and the prospects and the history of the Egyptian-Indian relations. And we're joined here in the studio by Ambassador Gillan, Allam, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Ambassador Allam, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our discussion with Ambassador Allam, let's check out the main story, obviously, making the news today, which is President el-Sisi arrived in the Indian capital, New Delhi, today upon an invitation from the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, to attend the country's Republic Day celebrations as a guest of honor. The day marks the first day India started work with its constitution in 1950. Presidential spokesman Bassam Muradi said the invitation for President el-Sisi to attend as a prime guest of honor reflects the great close ties with India and the deep appreciation by New Delhi. He said it also reflects India's strong keenness to expand joint cooperation between Cairo and New Delhi, being two of the rising countries. Muradi said both sides play important roles on the regional and international stages. He said the visit to India comes 75 years since Egypt and India established diplomatic ties. During the visit, President el-Sisi is scheduled to hold talks with Modi, the Indian president, and a number of Indian officials. Modi said the talks focus on mechanisms to boost economic ties and investment opportunities in Egypt. This is the main story making the news today, and now let's check out this report regarding President el-Sisi attending the 74th anniversary of the Republic Day of India in New Delhi. Let's check it out and we'll be right back.
President Fattah el-Sisi began a state visit to India on Tuesday, where he will take part for the first time ever in the South Asian country's 74th Republic Day celebrations. As chief guest, President el-Sisi is accompanied by high-level delegation, including 5 ministers and senior officials, at the invitation of Indian Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. A military contingent from Egyptian Army will also participate in the Republic Day's parade. President el-Sisi will be accorded a ceremonial welcome at the presidential residence by Indian President. The Indian President will also host a state banquet in President el-Sisi's honor the same day. The President is set to hold a bilateral meeting and delegation-level talks with the Indian Premier on a number of bilateral, regional and global issues of mutual interest. A business event with the Indian business community is also set to be held. President el-Sisi's visit is expected to further strengthen and deepen the time-tested partnership between India and Egypt. The visit is President el-Sisi's third one to India. He previously visited India in October 2015 to participate in the third India-Africa Forum Summit, and in September 2016 on a state visit. Both the Indian External Affairs Minister and Defense Minister visited Egypt last September and met with President el-Sisi. The visit to Cairo was seen as a significant gesture as the two sides stepped up military engagements. During the visit, the two sides signed MOU in the defense sector and agreed to focus on joint training, defense co-production and maintenance of equipment. Egypt was also invited to the India-Africa Defense Dialogue and IOR Defense Ministers Conclave that took place on the sidelines of the 12th DEF Expo in Gujarat in October. Egypt is looking to buy India's Tejas fighter jets. Both nations enjoy warm and friendly relations marked by civilizational, cultural and economic linkages and deep-rooted people-to-people ties which are based on a commitment to foster economic growth and collaborate in the fields of defense and security, and the convergence of views on regional and global issues. The two countries work closely at multilateral and international platforms. Trade exchange between Egypt and India achieved a record high of $7.26 billion in fiscal year 2021-2022, with $3.74 billion in Indian exports to Egypt and $3.52 billion imports from Egypt to India. The Ministry of Trade and Industry said the volume of trade exchange of non-petroleum products between Egypt and India hit nearly $4.1 billion during the first 11 months of 2022, including Egyptian exports at $723 million. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and starting off our discussion with Ambassador Gillan Allam. And it is worth mentioning that Ambassador Allam was actually the first female ambassador to India from 1995 to 1999. So it is quite important and spot on to have Her Excellency in tonight's show. Your Excellency, now, before we start talking about this meeting and this three-day visit by the President to New Delhi, can you please shed light on the history of the diplomatic relations between Egypt and India? It's been 50 years since we established 75 years. 75 years. Since 1950, since we established diplomatic relations with them. So can you shed light on the history and the development of the relationship between both countries?
Yes, well, you know, you should start. I mean, in some of our Indian friends used to tell me that it was since Ashoka, which is one of the greatest kings, you know, that's the time of Ptolemy II in the history of Egypt. There isn't much written about this, but let us get a little bit into the modern times, where there was Britain occupying both India and Egypt, and Mahatma Gandhi going to discuss the liberation of India, passing through the Suez Canal and consulting and talking with our Saad Zaghloul Pasha. And so there is a meeting of minds into the story. And then the most important part that everybody talks about, which is the relationship between our President Gamal Abdel Nasser and the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And why is it always the Prime Minister? Because it's the Prime Minister who invited, because it's a parliamentarian democracy. So it's the Parliament and which actually chooses the President and the Prime Minister, and he is the executive branch of the government. So we have this very long history of friendship, very well known. Together they were the founders of the non-aligned movement during the Cold War between the Western capitalist countries and the former Soviet Union. And it did continue. In 1955, there is this strategic, because we are using too much strategic friendship cooperation agreement between India and Egypt that established really the pillars of that kind of a friendship. So it's there. And then it continued during Nasser, during Sadat, President Of course, there are always, in the relationship between countries, there is always little ups and downs in this, but it never went to that far between Egypt and India. It was always based on respect, on the historic background, which is appreciated by both countries, because both countries are actually the carriers of two of the most important civilizations on our planet. So it is this way. And then came out the 2020s, and what happened during 2011, then 2012. Even during that sad year of the Brotherhood, President Morsi went to India and was received in India because he did consider the importance of India. But President El-Sisi now is undertaking that role as of he's taken. So he met with the Prime Minister on the verge, on the side of the United Nations General Assembly meeting. Then he was invited to go to India 2015 to attend the summit, India-Africa Summit. It was the third summit of India-Africa. Then a formal state visit in 2016. Then now we are coming again this year. And mind you, this year is very special in a very strange way, because in 2021 and 2022, during the COVID-19 epidemic, there was no celebration of Republic Day in India. And that is the first celebration of Republic Day in India in 2023. And the chief guest there was our President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt. So that tells you where do we stand together in times of relationships.
Well, Mrs. Ambassador, now you've mentioned that this is the first sort of visit post the coronavirus pandemic and the first celebrations post the pandemic. Now, what is the significance of such a visit? I mean, it's not just a ceremonial, celebratory visit for the Republic Day of India, but also there must be some sort of significance for the President's visit, the three-day visit to India, in light of the current political and economic developments taking over the whole world. So can you please shed light on the significance of this visit?
All right. This is a three-day visit by the President of Egypt to India. So we are talking presidential diplomacy, top diplomacy, to start with. Second, it's a three-day visit. When the president of a country goes for a three-day visit to another country, that means that the relation is large, it has many pillars, it's well established. There is need and urgency to expand on that, because we are going. And then we have a very full agenda for the President to fill up these 3 days. So, I mean, Prime Minister, President, business community, technical, defense affairs. So I mean, it's a very, and then Republic Day. It's not any. He is the first Egyptian president that is invited during all this history of the relations between our two countries. This is the first president of Egypt who has been invited to be the chief guest at the Republic Day celebration, and this is a very important celebration because it reflects, it dates the implementation of the Constitution of India, which was established, done, and written during the British occupation of India. So it is very special, and it started being implemented 74 years ago. Our relations, diplomatic relations at the ambassadorial level between Egypt and India, dates to 75 years ago. So that tells you where do we stand on that.
Yes. Well, during the ceremony, an Egyptian military contingent will be taking part in the parade, but obviously it's not just a ceremonial dimension for the presence of an Egyptian military contingent. celebrating the Indian Republic Day, there must be other meanings to the Egyptian military's participation in it. What do you feel it really means? It's not just taking part in the parade, but there has to be a deeper meaning.
A parade these days, these years, anywhere in the world, denotes an importance, a high importance. And the only parade in India where there is a military parade is Republic Day. So, and it's a very serious and beautiful, actually, parade. Of course, I've been invited to attend it every year when I was there. But it's a very important, and people really look forward to, because the Indian army is one of the strongest armies in the world. Let us remember that India now, today, is second to China in terms of number of population. Actually, there are starting some writings that say that no, India has bypassed China and becoming the #1 country in terms of population, 1.427 billion persons. India has the 5th largest economy in the world. It bypasses France, Canada, England, Brazil. So we see how it is taking giant leaps ahead on the international arena. So it certainly wants to project power and to project importance. And that parade during Republic Day, the fact that we have there, it's an honor that is given, a special privilege, a special appearance that we have an Egyptian contingent participating in that parade.
Yes.
And of course, because defense is very high on the list. I mean, the Minister of Defense of India has been visited in Egypt, I think it was October.
Yes, quite recently.
2022. Egypt is trying to buy or to produce together with India some kind of fighter planes, and there is some kind of also India has been invited, the Indian Army has been invited for the first time since I think the year 2000 to participate in the Bright Star maneuvers which are basically US-Egypt maneuvers, military maneuvers, but India will be participating this year in them. So I think there is a lot here at stake, and we are talking about, you know, a very, very bright and very fruitful cooperation in terms of defense. This is why we have this contingent there, and that we should also be very proud that our army is being called upon to join in this very formal and important opportunity in New Delhi.
Yes. Well, the presence or the strong presence of military cooperation between Egypt and India are really highlighted, as you've mentioned, in the parade of the Republic Indian Day. Also, they are currently engaged in military exercises dubbed Cyclone. Now, this sort of military cooperation also it just reflects and means that both countries see eye to eye on different political issues around the world. And that's why they are cooperating militarily. So what sort of views or files do you feel both countries share the same perspective and the same points of view regarding the current political developments taking over?
Counterterrorism, be it state or non-state. So this is a very important, I think, important file on the list. Strong cooperation in terms of maneuvers. Let us remember, if we look at the geography, Indian Ocean, Bab el-Mandab, the Red Sea, Suez Canal, Africa, Europe. So there is and importance of cooperating in terms of safeguarding the passing of ships and trade throughout all this area, long area. The importance, I mean, let's remember that we have been talking about lately that the security of the Gulf country is part of the security of Egypt, and this is not just some kind of a dictum that we keep talking. No, it has a strategic, a geostrategic meaning, because now why is India interested? Because of the very heavy population, Indian population, that is present in the Gulf countries. Yes. I mean, we should not remember, we should not forget that. I think this is very important. So, and the trade and the quantum of trade. So, there are so many reasons for what is going on that arena, and I think it complements the political and the economic. So this is where we are heading. I mean, we have to refresh. Let me put it in a different fashion. We have to refresh the way we look at our relations with different countries, and particularly the bigger countries, the emerging economies, the countries that are trying now. Well, you mentioned the G20. Now, India is heading, I mean, is chairman of the G20 for 2023. It will have its meeting, its summit meeting, I think September of 2023. So it has invited Egypt as a guest of honor to participate in that meeting, which means eventually that there is a possibility that President Sisi might be visiting India again this year again to attend the summit of the G20. So this is another level of this kind of diplomacy and this kind of relation that we should attend to and try to expand also on the economic and investment level.
Yes. Well, Your Excellency, you've mentioned India presiding and chairing the G20 summit for 2023, and Egypt is one of the 9 guest countries attending the summit. Egypt now attending this summit, having a seat with the rest of the G20 countries. Now, do you think that it's mainly an economic sort of expansion of relations, or giving Egypt a stronger voice economically, or is it politically? How will the rest of the international community see Egypt holding and filling one of the seats in this summit, and what does it also mean for Egypt?
It means a lot for every party that is participating in this G20. G20 is basically the G7, the industrialized countries, and plus the European Union per se, and then another 12 emerging economies. So it tells us, I mean, they represent almost 80% of the world GDP. So it is not only an economic perception, it's a world situation whereby we are looking what's going to happen in the future of this world. We have had, I mean, the war in Ukraine has presented the world, has faced the world with a new geopolitical situation that the West is trying to adapt and trying to solve. Is it going to be solved? So in the G20, all of these issues are going to be. I mean, Egypt has had a problem with providing wheat and oil and so on. And we import 80% of our needs of wheat from that part of the world, from the Ukraine-Russia connection. So the world now, the Western world, Europe, all of Europe is facing a problem of it's going to be very cold in Europe the winter. So oil and petroleum. So I think that the G20 will take a different leap and will be looking at from a very different perspective. The fact that Egypt has been invited to go there is talks for itself. And we have to take it very serious, particularly that we have been hosting COP27. I mean, President El-Sisi is also wearing the hat of the president of COP27, and throughout this year, Egypt is carrying the burden of trying to establish the fund that has been decided upon there. So climate and investment in green economies is going to be also very much high on the list.
Yes.
And so, and Egypt, again, I mean, I'm trying to make the linkages,
the connections,
and the connections, which is very deep and very, I mean, it's really very expendable. It's expanding, not expanding. It's very expanding, because we are trying to be a center for producing of energy, be it gas, oil, or green energy, hydrogen. So G20 is going to talk very much on the green economies and the green sources of energy, what we're going to do. So, I mean, this is really a very heavy agenda and a very different agenda from what used to be before in the G20 meetings. India is heading that and inviting Egypt to be a guest there. And we are going there bearing not only a guest, but also bearing the file of climate and green economies with us.
Well, ladies and gentlemen,
complicated.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as Her Excellency mentioned, there is so many purposes for such a visit, not just a ceremonial one. Egypt needs to strengthen the economic, political, military, and also the climate cooperation with India. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Fattah al-Sisi's three-day visit to India is expected to deepen the time-tested partnership between the two countries. The President is invited as representative of guest country for India Republic Day celebrations on January 26th. With bilateral coherence in trade, agriculture, defense, education and counter-terrorism, New Delhi-Cairo ties are set to elevate in the immediate future. The visit is expected to strengthen focus on agriculture defense as part of efforts to elevate India-Egypt ties. This is the first time that Egypt has been invited as guest country at India's Republic Day celebrations. This is President Sisi's third visit to India since taking charge in 2014. His last visited India on bilateral visit in September 2016, and before that attended the third India-Africa Forum Summit in New Delhi. It is also the fifth time that India has invited a country from West Asia, Saharan Africa on Republic Day, after Algeria in 2001, Iran in 2003, Saudi Arabia in 2006, and UAE in 2017. Indian Prime Minister Modi met Sisi during the third India-Africa Forum Summit in New Delhi in October 2015. That same year, the two leaders had also met on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Egypt is among the 9 countries invited by India for the G20 summit that will be hosted in New Delhi in September 2023. India too has been invited to Egypt for Bright Star exercises in September. Bright Star are joint training exercises led by United States and Egyptian forces and held in Egypt every 2 years. India had last participated in the Brighter Star exercises in 2000. Last year, for the first time, India's wheat exports reached Egypt after New Delhi gave an exemption for 61,000 tons to Cairo. The wheat was sent to Egypt in tranches, with the first tranche sent in May 2022. India has been keen to increase ties with Africa, and next year could see the India-Africa Summit as well, the last of which took place in 2015. Education is another area which is in focus. The Egyptian side wants to establish an Indian higher education center like Indian Institutes of Technology in Egypt. Despite coronavirus pandemic, the volume of trade declined by marginally $4.5 billion in 2019-2020 and to $4.15 billion in 2020-2021. Amid the Russia-Ukraine conflict, India sent a wheat consignment to the country. Egypt has shown interest in getting India's homegrown defense technologies as LCA, Tejaz, radar technology, missile technology, and DRDO smart anti-airfield weapon. There has been one of close cooperation between Indian and Egyptian air forces, with efforts at jointly developing a fighter aircraft in 1960s. IAF pilots also trained Egyptian pilots from 1960s until 1984. Egypt regularly provides transit facilities to IAF and Indian Navy aircraft ferrying to and from Russia, Europe and the USA. In fact, the multi-faceted relationship between the two countries is based on shared cultural values, a commitment to foster economic growth, collaboration in the fields of defense and security, and convergence on regional and global issues. The two countries work closely at multilateral and international platforms. Ties with Egypt key to India's ambitions in North Africa, and Egypt is one of the most important economies in Africa and one of the most important Arab states.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Ambassador Allam. Now, Your Excellency, you've mentioned that a 3-day visit means that there are so many topics on the agenda. Yes. Now, it is anticipated that Egypt and India would sign about 6 memoranda of understanding for cooperation. And it seems that it's not just India, but there's also, we've been hearing about Chinese-Arab summits, India having its own Arab and African summits, Egypt and India as well. You've mentioned that India is the 5th largest economy in the world, so it's competing with China, the 2nd biggest. So do you feel that now these major economies around the world are competing to establish and strengthen ties with Arab and African countries, and mainly Egypt as well, because it represents a gateway to the rest of the African continent? How do you see this sort of competition between, for instance, India and China over the relations and the investments with Arab countries and Egypt?
It's a true competition, and we have to deal with it, and we have to make the best out of it. I mean, you are dealing, whether you mention China or you mention India, 2 very large economies, the 2nd and the 5th. So, and then in terms of future of this emergence of big economies. I mean, if the United States, which is the #1 all through, fears the competition of China, the economic competition of China, and we see all this still, you know, quiet competition, quiet quid pro quo, trying to hit at each other in such a way. I think we have to realize that we are getting into a new world order in terms of economic strength. Who is really taking charge? Now, maybe China is playing a larger role. I mean, it is giving a lot of loans to African countries. It is giving a lot of help. It is trying really to infiltrate into Africa in different ways. I mean, building roads, building electricity, power, so on. India has the privilege of having a lot of Indian constituencies in most of all African countries, and like we mentioned, in countries of the Gulf. So, I mean, these 2 countries are trying to, step by step, you know, infiltrate and settle down. Now, what do we do? I mean, how should we handle that? We have the economic zone of the Suez Canal, which has been open, and we want to establish there joint projects with different countries, whoever comes, and we have a new law for investment, and we want to be a center for green energy. I think we can use both countries to have to come and invest. I mean, they are liable and they are open for investment. So I think we should work with them on that level and concentrate in this. I mean, digitalization. Both countries. And I do remember that even in the 1995, 1999 period, that India had very big whole states that are talking digitalization.
Yes.
And I was trying we were not yet, I mean, entering this era of digitalization, but now we are. And China is very advanced in that regard. So is India very advanced in that regard, even before China. And I mean, they are all over the world. So I think we can use that also in enhancing our wishes and our intentions and our plans for digitalization of the Egyptian economy. And so there are so many hubs of cooperation with the two countries. And this is why, you know, this visit of President Sisi to India is a very business oriented visit. And and this is why he is meeting with the heads of the industry, in the Indian industry there, to see where we can cooperate at presidential diplomacy. I think this is how it is. We have always taken the kind of non-aligned, and maybe it is time also for us to review the concept of non-alignment in terms of politics, geopolitics, and also economy. I think it's about time. And that, as founder of the non-aligned movement with India, I think we can work with them again on reviewing that concept of non-alignment. Why not have a fresh look at it and try to renovate and innovate in that particular area? I think that we have a lot, and we have a lot of potential, and we can do lots of things together.
Well, a lot of political observers are looking at the geopolitical affairs of the world right now, and they're saying that maybe the Russia-Ukraine crisis, it is affecting the economies all over the world, causing a lot of inflation and energy crises and wheat and food crises as well. So a lot of observers and analysts are saying, well, it makes it really hard for countries and governments and companies as well to have some sort of cooperative investments and projects. But at the same time, others say, well, it actually means that now is the right time for other countries to take advantage of major economies and major superpowers being embroiled in their own military conflicts, and now is the time to start making the deals and start making the memorandums of understanding and actually implementing them to really get higher on the economic food chain. Which view do you feel is more suitable to the current situation?
Lucky enough, I mean, geography has sometimes been on our side and sometimes been on the wrong side, But I think this time geography is telling us that we have to. I mean, we have kept our peace, and we're trying to keep that peace. India and China also are trying to advance economically, but trying also to keep some kind of a balanced diplomacy and balanced relation with the world, between them and the world. And this is why there is this very active access and attempts at access towards Africa, because it is a definite source of energy, of raw materials, of markets, and it's away from this center of conflicts that is being sometimes heated up in Europe with the fear that there might be a third world war. So I think the two huge economies of China and India are looking at places far away from that center of conflict. So if by sheer chance that should something erupt, then we still have our backup, our back burner, so to speak.
Yeah.
But let me say this, and here it shows the impact of good relations, keeping yourself at a measured distance, actually, not just a distance, but at a measured, well measured and well studied distance from that. When the war erupted in Ukraine, and we could not get our wheat, all right, what did we do? We went to wheat growers like India, and we said, we need wheat. There was this rule, and for India, we are not exporting whatever is food. But for Egypt, they took an exception, and we received wheat, emergency wheat, let us say, from India. But remember that in 2020, during the height of COVID-19, India was one of the largest countries infected with COVID-19. Egypt did not hesitate. 3 large planes were sent with vaccines and medical
aid.
Yes, to India from Egypt. This is where the good relations and the friendly relations and the measured peace and the measured relations between countries come into help, into emergency help with that. So I think that same with China. So now with our economic zone of the Suez Canal, I think we are ready to go into agreements. Of course, I mean, all this huge multi-billion or billion investment worth do not come overnight and just because you sign the paper.
Yes.
No, it needs preparation. And I think the two countries have the potential. We have seen that happening with China investing heavily in the economic zone of the Suez Canal. We have seen that with 50 Indian companies investing in Egypt in black carbon and so on, I mean, in different areas. So, I mean, the Indian industry is here. All what we have to do is some kind of open a new door and a new horizon, and you put new potential for new projects to happen. I think it is doable, and I think it's beneficial for all parties.
Yes. So basically, when they made the exception to export wheat to Egypt, it was, as you've mentioned, a response to the Egyptian goodwill that Egypt showed during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic by sending vaccines and medical aid. Now, you've mentioned the areas of cooperation, the potential cooperation that could be taking place on the economic zones of the Suez Canal. Also, you've mentioned the information communication technology and the digitalization and artificial intelligence that India is quite advanced in. Also, green energy. So all of these things are areas of cooperation, potential areas of cooperation that Egypt would benefit from its strong relations with India. How soon do you feel that we can translate these sort of potential projects and potential cooperation to be implemented on the ground? When can we see, you've mentioned the 50 companies or more investing in Egypt, more than $3 billion. When can we actually see the strong presence on the ground, getting the agreement signed and the expertise and the money flowing in both directions?
Presidential diplomacy. In brief, this is it. I mean, the president visits the country, so we're talking serious relations, we're talking serious business. And we have to continue from here, from Cairo and from New Delhi, and we open the big gates. And I think it's doable. I mean, I feel strongly about this. That I mean, there is nothing impossible.
Yes.
When you intend to do it, there is nothing impossible. It's doable. And I think if countries are willing and good at doing this, I think China and India are two very good examples. And Egypt also. And I've seen it for myself on so many, on so many levels. I think it's doable, and I think it's done, and we have the ground ready for it. So I think presidential diplomacy tells it all. I mean, it's the brief response to your question.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Ambassador Allam has mentioned, it's a 3-day visit, but it really holds a lot of potential for a lot of strengthening of relations, be it in climate relations, political, economic, everything that could be beneficial for both countries. We're going to be witnessing over the coming 2 days as well the agreements, the commitment that will be shared between both countries, and we'll be following these developments here on Nile International. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guest, Ambassador Gillan Allam, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Your Excellency, it was a pleasure having you with us on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.